What's up, everybody? Chris Pennell here. We're going my running back tier rankings for week 13 of the fantasy football season. If you enjoy, make sure you like down below, subscribe to the channel if you're brand new. Let's dive right into it. I do want to mention quick that we do have several teams on bye this weekend, but the notables that we'll be missing from our lineups this week are going to be Saquon Barkley and Josh Jacobs, two pretty similar running backs, so they get a ton of volume just in terrible offenses. But let's start with the S tier. We have one guy, and you can guess who it is. It's Christian McCaffrey. No matter the matchup, he is going to be here every single week. His floor is really just up there with Tyreek Hill every single week. Like, they are the two most dominant players in fantasy football, and they will be in the S tier every single week despite the matchup. And funny enough, we actually have the worst matchup in the world for Christian McCaffrey this week versus the Philly defense. They're currently allowing the fewest points per game in the running back position at 15.3, 62 rushing yards, and barely any rushing touchdowns. Are giving up over 5 catches and 30 receiving yards, which you know is right up CMC's wheelhouse. But he is too talented on too good of an offense, and his role is too good for him to not be up here every single week. 85 yards on the ground, over 17 carries, a rushing touchdown per game, 5 yards per carry, nearly 5 targets, and a 19% target share. He's a touchdown scoring machine. No reason not to like CMC, despite the poor matchup. The volume and talent will get him there, and his situation that he's in, that offense is just too good for him not to be up here. Like, his median projection for me is roughly right around 20 points this week. The next best is going to be in that 16 to 18 range. So when you're that much higher than everybody else on a median basis, as far as projections are concerned in a model, yeah, you're going to be up here no matter what. And that does factor in the poor matchup. Tony Pollard's going to be number 2 for me, and we're going to kick off the A tier with him. And we finally have gotten him back on track in the touchdown department, because he did not score before week 1 since the recent touchdown versus the Carolina Panthers. But since then, 2 times in the end zone in a row, and his volume is still there. We're getting close to 20 opportunities every single week. We've had 11 targets and 10 catches the previous 2 weeks, and this is a great matchup versus Seattle, who is getting destroyed by running backs this season. We just saw Christian McCaffrey have a huge game versus them on Thanksgiving. They're currently on the 4th most points in the position at 26.7, over 40 receiving yards, and over a rushing touchdown per game. And this offense should put up a lot of points this week. 28.25 implied team total, which is the second highest of the week, only behind the Miami Dolphins. They're also 9-point favorites at home, so everything points to Tony Pollard once again having a very solid day, especially if he can find the end zone. And then we have Travis Etienne at number 3. The volume has not been an issue, but he has not been that productive in recent weeks, but I think he's going to get back on track here versus Cincinnati. He's an 8.5-point favorite at home with a 23.5 implied team total. He's getting you over 20 opportunities per game. He's involved in the passing game, and the Bengals are currently 19th versus the position. So this is a nice get-right spot for Travis Etienne owners who have been struggling recently. And they have Alvin Kamara at number 4, who's in that CMC role for the New Orleans Saints. Obviously, the offense isn't as good, which why it doesn't lead to as much fantasy production as Christian McCaffrey. But so you're getting 15 carries on the ground per game and over 7.5 targets, which equates to a 19.8% target share. It's not a great matchup versus Detroit, but this is purely just volume based, and with a large chunk of that being in the passing game, if you're in a PPR scoring league, that adds up a ton. Kyren Williams of the Los Angeles Rams, he returned last week versus the Arizona Cardinals. Absolute nuke, roughly around 40 fantasy points depending on your league scoring. Bit of a tougher matchup here versus the Cleveland Browns. They're allowing the 12th fewest points per game to the position. But when Kyren Williams is healthy and he's the main back in this offense, he crushes. 16 carries per game, 85 rushing yards, nearly a rushing touchdown per game, over 5 yards per carry, and he's involved in the passing game, which is great too. And he has 0.4 receiving touchdowns per game as well. 4 targets per game, 11.5% target share, and he's getting 20 opportunities per week. And actually, Alvin Kamara, he's averaging 22.5. So if you're wondering why I like him despite the poor matchup, a lot of this is just based off opportunity. And when a large chunk of that opportunity is based in the passing game and you're in PPR scoring leagues, which is what this is based off of, that is what's going to factor in a lot. So the matchup is not great for either of these backs, but the volume is what's going to keep them relevant, especially with passing game upside. Then we have Jahmyr Gibbs of the Detroit Lions. I had him very high on Thanksgiving. I actually had him at number 2. A couple people, actually several people, were not a fan of that, which I understand the result wasn't great, but not everything can be result oriented. He still got you 20 opportunities in the game, with 8 of those being in the passing game. If you're going to tell me heading to the week versus Green Bay Packers, which is a very plus matchup, that Jahmyr Gibbs is going to give me 19 to 20 opportunities, yeah, I'm going to have him ranked that high. So we got the volume. It just didn't turn into the greatest production, which is pretty uncharacteristic for Jahmyr Gibbs, as he is one of the more efficient backs in the league on the season, averaging over 5 yards per carry, and with his 5 targets, averaging 31 receiving yards as well. So a bit of an off week for Jahmyr Gibbs, but I do think he can bounce back here despite the matchup being poor. Then we have Austin Eckler rounding out the A tier, and I'm just not a big fan of Austin Eckler this season, but his volume is what's going to keep him relevant, especially with his involvement in the passing game. As you can see, there's a very common theme here. If you have involvement in the passing game in your offense and you're still getting a bulk of carries on the ground, there's a good chance you're going to be in the A tier and above. That's just the way it works in fantasy football these days. There's a couple guys that do see involvement in the passing game that are a little bit lower, but the rushing upside just maybe isn't as high, or the matchup's a little bit poor. And Eckler has been horribly inefficient this season. 3.6 yards per carry. He looks slow out there. Doesn't look great. This is a good matchup versus the Patriots, though. They're 6-point favorites, 24-point implied team total on the road. in Foxborough. And they're in a middle-of-the-road matchup, 16th versus fantasy running backs, but only allowing 77 rushing yards per game. But Eckler's always going to have that touchdown upside if they get around the goal line. He's going to have that pass catching upside, 5 targets per game on a 15% target share. So he is in the A tier, but it was very slim. I was considering putting him in the B tier, but not quite yet. Moving on to our B tier, we're going to lead off with Rachaad White of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, his second best yardage game of his career last week, 100 yards on the ground versus the Indianapolis Colts. Another really good matchup here versus the Carolina Panthers. While I'm not really playing him for what he can do on the ground, it was nice to see a pretty efficient game last weekend. But the Panthers are currently 30th versus running backs. They have 2 touchdowns to Derrick Henry last week, 110 rushing yards, 1.5 rushing touchdowns. What I'm mainly interested in is that Rachaad White gets a ton of dump-offs. We didn't really see it last week, but on the season, he has a 13% target share, over 4 targets per game. And if we can get any rushing upside, I would take it from White, and hopefully we can fall to the end zone. The Buccaneers had several opportunities inside the 5 last week, and we just didn't get any opportunity from Rachaad White. Baker Mayfield even tried to sneak it in, ended up getting hurt in that play, but that's what it is. But the volume's going to be there, and that floor is really nice with the pass catching upside. And then we have Isaiah Pacheco of the Kansas City Chiefs. Jerick McKinnon missed last week. If he happened to be out once again, I mean, Isaiah Pacheco is such a super safe play at that point because you're probably going to get 15 plus carries. You're getting a handful of targets, which we saw last week. And he's always going to have touchdown upside because the offense can put up points. They're going to be inside the 5. And if he gets the opportunity, decent chance he can punch it in. Plus, this is a great matchup versus the Green Bay Packers. They're currently 23rd versus the position, allowing over 100 rushing yards per game. So Pacheco, I'd feel fine as being a mid to low end RB1 this week. Then we have Raheem Mostert of the Miami Dolphins. I currently do not know if Devon Achane is going to play or not. If he plays, you can put him a little bit lower down the list. If he is confirmed out, you can put Raheem Mostert, honestly, probably in the A tier, lower end of the A tier, upper end of the B tier. Because we saw last week with Noah Chan, Jeff Wilson did see a lot of targets, which was really annoying. But at the end of the game in the second half, Raheem Mostert had a horrible first half, but he got cooking at the very end, ripped off a really long touchdown in garbage time. Either way, the points all counted the same, but he's a 29.5 implied team total this weekend, which is the highest of the week. 9.5 point favorites versus Washington, and they're ranked 20th versus running back. So if Achane is out, boost Mostert up these rankings. If he's not, you could probably put him right around here, just a little bit lower. But I kind of have to factor him in as somewhat playing this week, so it's really hard to do the projection as we currently do not know the situation as of right now. And then we have Derrick Henry here. Got 2 touchdowns last week, which is nice to see. On the year, though, obviously he hasn't been that efficient, only 4.2 yards per carry, but he's probably going to get a 16-20 carries. And this one is it's a pretty good matchup versus the Indianapolis Colts. We just saw Rachaad White run for 100 yards versus them, and if Rachaad White can get 100 yards, I think Derrick Henry's in contention for that as well. They're actually averaging that on the season, and they're 26 versus running backs, and the touchdown upside is always going to be high with King Henry. Then we have Zach Moss here of the Indianapolis Colts, and Jonathan Taylor is going to be out for a while. Maybe the rest of the season. I'm not exactly sure what's going on with his thumb, but he did end up having to have surgery on that. But we know the RB1 role for the Indianapolis Colts is going to be viable. And earlier in the season, I know people don't really like to play running backs versus the Tennessee Titans. They're 13th versus them this year, and last year they were absolutely shut down, which I think a lot of people are still scared of that. But Zach Moss scored over 30 fantasy points versus them earlier in the season, and what's going to be a pretty similar role. I'd imagine on the season he actually has been pretty efficient at roughly right around 5 yards per carry at 4.8. So Zach Moss here, he's going to enter the low-end RB1, high-end RB2 discussion this week for sure. And rounding out the B tier, we have Bijan Robinson of the Atlanta Falcons. 3 touchdowns the previous 2 weeks, also 22 carries and 16, including 6 targets last week as well, with 2 touchdowns in the game, 1 through the air, 1 on the ground. So it seems like the role is increasing. Maybe Arthur Smith is listening to us. He's realizing his sins and he's trying to make up for it. And it's actually a pretty decent matchup here versus the New York Jets. They're currently 28th versus the position, allowing 110 rushing yards per game, over 40 receiving yards, and 0.4 receiving touchdowns. That equates to 26.1 points per game. And we know Bijan, he's been efficient with his touches this year. He just wasn't really getting the opportunity, but the previous 2 weeks, we love to see it. Tyler Algier is not going to completely go away. Still had 10 carries last week, which is why Bijan's not in that A or upper end of the B tier, but I still think he's an excellent option this weekend. Moving on to the C tier, we have Ramondre Stevenson of the New England Patriots. I hate playing Patriots players because this offense sucks. It's slow. They have low implied team totals every single week, 17 3/4 this weekend, 6-point dogs at home versus the Chargers. He's been really inefficient this season, but he's getting targets, getting roughly 15 carries per game on the season. Well, actually a little bit lower, 13 carries per game, but previous 2 weeks, the volume has been a bit better, 17 opportunities per game this season. But the matchup versus the Chargers, they're 25th versus the position, so we can just get volume here. Maybe he falls into the end zone. I think he's safe from a volume perspective, though, this week, which is why I have him up here. Javonte Williams, he's the lead back in this offense, but there's definitely a few guys that are going to get touches, including Samaje Perine and McLaughlin as well. But on the season, still averaging 14 carries per game on 3 targets. I still think the volume is fine. This game should be somewhat high scoring. 47.5 point over under, which is one of the higher ones of the week. 22 point implied team total here. Texans are currently 17th versus running back position, but he has a secure enough role in this offense to where he's going to be fantasy relevant. Devon Achane is up next, and I really don't know where to put him because if he is fully healthy, he's a guy that can knock on the door for the A tier, upper end of the B tier. But with him, both him and Raheem Mostert, if they're both healthy, it's going to be a bit of a split. We know Achane's got that game-breaking upside. He's going to be involved in the passing game. I would assume he takes over that role from Jeff Wilson because I think they would much rather have Achane getting the ball in open space than Jeff Wilson. But as of right now, it's TBT. We don't know if he's going to play it or not. I could see them sitting him one more week because it's Washington and they should be able to win the game either way. But as of right now, the only guy that knows that is the head coach. Then we have David Montgomery of the Detroit Lions. Obviously not quite as much upside as Jahmyr Gibbs. When they're on the goal line, he's definitely going to have touchdown scoring opportunities. I just don't love the matchup versus the Saints as they're allowing the 8th fewest points per game to the position. But if he gets that touchdown, then that's when David Montgomery is viable. And every week with the Lions, he's going to have that touchdown equity because they have high implied team totals pretty much every single week. It's 25 this week, which is fine. Then we have Breece Hall of the New York Jets rounding out our C tier. Really tough playing New York Jets these days with Tim Boyle at quarterback and only a 15.5 implied team total in this one. And get this, a 34 point over under, which is the lowest of the week, and they come in as 3-point dogs at home. But he's an efficient enough back to where maybe if he only gets you 10 carries on the ground because they are trailing, he should still see targets, over 4 targets per game on a 13.5% target share. Tim Boyle should be able to check the ball down to him a few times. And that's what's going to keep him relevant. And leading off our D tier, we have a pair of running backs from the same team, Jaylen Warren and Najee Harris. I'm just in love with the matchup this week versus Arizona Cardinals. They're currently allowing the second most points per game at the position after Kyren Williams did an absolute nuke job on them. Heading into the week, I believe they're allowing the third most points per game, but 120 rushing yards, 30.3 points per game, and a rushing touchdown. Also a little bit of damage to the air as well. So I think there's enough to go around for both of these backs, and I don't really think the Steelers want to trust Kenny Pickett to win them the game. 23.5 implied team total, 5.5 point favorites here at home. And Warren's been a lot more efficient this season, but I feel like the volume's a little bit safer with Najee, and he's been scoring touchdowns at a decent rate so far this season, but both are certainly viable. I have Jaylen Warren just slightly higher in projection right now because he has more pass catching upside, 14% target share in the season compared to 7.5 for Najee Harris, but both are obviously fine options. DeAndre Swift was way low in the rankings this week, but the matchup is brutal versus the 49ers. 59 rushing yards per game, 5th fewest points as well, 17.7 points. A little bit through the air though, over 5 catches and 30 receiving yards, which is going to keep Swift still in play this week because you know the Eagles offense is good enough to where they can put up points and Swift will have plenty of opportunity to do well in this game, and he has been efficient this season and he's involved through the air. It's just the matchup sucks. Same for Zach Charbonnet. They go against the Dallas Cowboys here. Now, as I project both for pretty similar volume and with no Kenneth Walker looking likely, Charbonnet is going to have the full reins this week and he's going to be involved in the passing game, but they're allowing the 4th fewest points per game, and it's pretty much the exact same thing I said for DeAndre Swift can be applied here for Charbonnet, plus the Seattle offense isn't as good as Phillies as well, which does present even less upside. And then we have Devin Singletary here of the Houston Texans. Dameon Pierce did return last week, only saw 5 carries. They were trailing in that game though, so I guess TBT to see the actual usage going forward. But Singletary played 82% of the snaps, so I'm assuming he's going to be the main RB here. I mean, Pierce has not been good this season in the slightest. If you're looking at his overall numbers, we're actually going to have him a little bit lower in the rankings in this video, but he's at 3 yards per carry in the season. And looking at Devin Singletary, he's at 4.1. So both haven't exactly been great, but he had 7 targets last week. So I think Singletary is going to be the preferred back going forward. We know this Texans offense can put up points, and it's a pretty good spot for them this weekend versus Denver. They're allowing the most points per game in the running back position. Now keep in mind their defense has gotten better as the season has progressed. You can still run them. 25.5 implied team total here, 3.5 point favorites, 47.5 point over under. So I'm fine with Singletary as a deeper league flex option this weekend. If you look up boring in the dictionary, you'll probably see Joe Mixon's picture right there. There's just really no redeeming qualities for him in this offense at this point in the season. He's inefficient. He's going to get volume, but they're probably going to be trailing. They're 8.5 point dogs here, 15 point implied team total. The defense doesn't really have to respect Jake Browning as much, so I just don't really see what Mixon's going to have going for him. Like, sure, he could plunge into the end zone. That's why I have him here, but I just don't really see much upside. Plus, this matchup sucks. If you're looking at Jacksonville, they're only allowing 59 rushing yards per game. They're currently 15th versus running backs, but most of that is done through the air. So if we can get a couple of dump offs from Mixon, sure, but I just don't really have any trust in this Bengals offense right now. Then, speaking of boring, we have James Conner, who hasn't really done anything in a while. I realized he was injured for a bit, but we haven't had a double-digit game in quite some time for James Conner. And it's a decent matchup versus Pittsburgh. They're allowing 100 yards per game. They're 18th versus running backs, but I just don't see a ton of upside, especially with Kyler Murray at quarterback. He can always still rushing touchdowns around the goal line as well, which is unfortunate for Conner. Going to the F tier, Jerome Ford of the Cleveland Browns. Him and Kareem Hunt are both going to be fantasy relevant, but it's not going to add up to too many points, especially in this one, I think. Versus the Los Angeles Rams, allowing the 8th fewest points per game in the position. 18-point implied team total here for the Browns, and Dorian Thompson-Robinson doesn't give this offense as much scoring opportunities than Deshaun Watson would, so he's going to be this low in the rankings. Brad Robinson, Antonio Gibson is healthy. He's going to be the main pass catching back in this offense. We have seen Brad Robinson get targets before, though, so he's not going to completely go away. But I just hate the game script for him because we like Robinson in games where we think that the Commanders could be leading, which doesn't really happen too often. 20-point implied team total, which is fine here, but they're 9.5-point dogs on the road, so I do think this leads to a lot of dump offs, but probably more so towards Antonio Gibson. AJ Dillon, we just saw Aaron Jones not practicing on Wednesdays, so if he's going to be out again, we know Dillon's going to be the main back, which is fine. I love the matchup versus the Chiefs, but it's a little bit easier to run them than it is to pass. But if he's going to get his 15 plus touches, while it's probably not going to be too productive, he's going to be fantasy relevant, especially since he'll get goal line carries. Dameon Pierce of the Houston Texans, he's like the worst version of Devin Singletary, so it just makes sense he's in the F tier. We already mentioned him, so I don't really think there's much else to say. Then you have Spears of the Titans here. If anything ever happened to Derrick Henry, he would be a very fantasy relevant running back. But unfortunately, unless they're going to be trailing or it's a passing down, he's not going to have too much upside. But he has been efficient with his touches this year as he is over 5 yards per carry. But with that being said, that's all I got for today's video. So I hope you enjoyed. If you did, make sure you like down below. Subscribe to the channel if you're brand new. Wish you all the best of luck this week. I'll watch your video out later either today or tomorrow. But I'll see you all next time.